Hello, and welcome to The Anxious Adventurer. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am so excited you're here. I'm Katie Schlegel, your host of the Anxious Adventurer podcast, and as you may have guessed it, yes, I'm an anxious adventurer. I know that may sound contradicting, but I'm here to tell you that if the thought of traveling somewhere brings up those feelings of anxiety or stress, you've come to the right place. I've traveled to over 17 countries around the world. I've lived in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and trekked across South America solo. I don't say these things to impress you. No, that is not what I'm here for. I say these things to let you know that every single one of those experiences had moments where my anxiety made me feel like I could not do it. So if that's how you feel or have ever felt, you are not alone. I am right there with you. Before I dive into today's story, I wanted to thank everyone who has taken the time to rate and review The Anxious Adventurer. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my very first 3 episodes and taking the extra time to hit those 5 stars. I greatly appreciate every single one. If you feel so inclined to leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, I would forever be grateful. Plus, I'll give you a shout out like I'm about to do here to Sarah H., who so kindly wrote my very first review. I was so ecstatic when I saw it, Sarah. Thank you so much. She said, Katie is a beautiful storyteller. I can't wait to hear more of her stories. I also love Mariposa Skies. What a beautiful business model with an incredible mission. This podcast makes me feel like I can be brave and travel the world even when it stresses me out. So excited about this podcast. Well, goodness gracious, thank you so much, Sarah, for that amazing and incredibly thoughtful and kind review. I am so glad you're enjoying the podcast and it's making you feel brave. That's what I love to hear. You got a lot of moxie, girl. Sarah's review actually ties in perfectly with today's episode because today I want to tell you how I started my business that she mentioned, Mariposa Skies. Speaking of moxie, it takes a lot of moxie to travel this beautiful planet, doesn't it? You know what else takes a lot of moxie? Starting your own business. I love that word moxie. It has such a great meaning too. It means you have self-possessed confidence, an attitude of fearlessness, determination, and perseverance, a courageous spirit. In today's episode, I want to tell you a little bit more about my business that combines my love of travel and learning about culture with my other love, fashion. I want to take you on a little adventure around the world as I unfold the story of how Mariposa Skies came to be. And of course, I'll be sprinkling in some really good old lessons I learned along the way. I didn't start out knowing what I was doing. No, far from it. I just knew I wanted to connect people from different worlds together in a fun and unique way. Little did I know that it would all start with a trip to Rio de Janeiro and a walk down a popular beach boardwalk. So join me as we set off on our next adventure. Grab your passports because we are going to be doing some serious traveling today. Welcome to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, a country of gorgeous beaches, the Amazon rainforest, samba, and beautiful people inside and out. You can't help but have a smile on your face while walking around Rio. There is so much life, color, and movement that is happening all around you. I'm not going to do a deep dive into Rio or Brazil today because there's a story I'd like to tell you instead. Plus, I have many other episodes planned for that. Don't worry. The story begins, like I said, with a walk along a beach in Rio de Janeiro. Ipanema, to be exact. Cue song now. I was walking along, enjoying the beauty of Brazil and listening to the music of Carnival. Everyone seemed to be out that day, and the city was alive with all the festivities. As I was walking, something caught my eye down on the beach. It was a beautiful and brightly colored conga, also known as the sarong. I walked by it at first, being that I was so very shy and spoke very little Portuguese. But as I kept walking, my intuition told me, go back and buy that conga. So I mustered up my courage, put on my big girl pants, and went back and bought it. Little did I know it would be the start of something amazing, something that took an incredible amount of moxie. And here is your very first lesson. And this is one of the greatest lessons I have learned on my many travels around the world. Do not ignore your intuition. It guides you with those subtle feelings and tugs that turn into thoughts that then can turn into great things. So why am I telling you about this conga? For that, I need you to grab your passport because we're headed back to the United States. On one fateful day, a year later, I was on a road trip out to the East Coast. I was at a gas station and the woman attendant behind the counter commented on my scarf, the conga, and how beautiful and colorful it was. She just loved it. I thanked her, and what always came next was this question: where did you get it? I told her I bought it while I was in Brazil, to which she responded, "Wow, I wish I could go to Brazil and get one." I smiled at the thought of this and how this one piece of fashion has been the start of many conversations with complete strangers. As I got back in my car and headed back on the road, that thought started to marinate in my mind. And that's when the first inkling of an idea started to form, though I didn't even know it at the time. This whole idea of my online boutique, Mariposa Skies, started with a series of happenings. What seemed like those insignificant moments, like I talked about in episode 2, but that all lined up in the end. Looking back, I can see it so clearly now, and how all the pieces fit together. But while it was happening, I sure did not. And this is where the story gets interesting. All right, just grab your bags this time because we're headed to my hometown of San Diego, California. I was working at a local upholstery shop, Quality Interiors. I remember having a conversation with a coworker, Shelly, about a new TV show on PBS called Mr. Selfridge. She loved it and thought I would too, so I decided to take a look. Do you have times in your life when you remember exactly where you were and what you were doing when something significant happened to you? Maybe you got an idea or some big news. Whatever it was, you can remember the details of that moment, down to what you were wearing. And that's what happened to me. Let me paint you the picture. Mr. Selfridge was only in its second season at the time, and they were showing the first season again to get people excited for season 2. In the very first episode, Mr. Selfridge comes on the screen and tells the heads of his departments to scour the world for the finest merchandise to fill his store. Go to Colombia for the best emeralds, France for the latest in women's fashion, etc. I remember thinking, man, what a cool job that would be. It wasn't until several weeks after watching that very first episode of Mr. Selfridge when it happened. I was walking into my bathroom, getting ready for the day, when the idea finally downloaded. I remember thinking out of the blue, I could have that job. Ugh, but how? Well, I could create that job. And guess what? At that moment, I was wearing my conga from Brazil as a wrap. And when I looked in the mirror, I knew this was it. This is what I'm meant to be doing. So what does a conga and Mr. Selfridge have to do with my online boutique, Mariposa Skies? Well, as you can see, the two aligned in a series of fortunate events. The conga from Brazil was just a catalyst, if you will, as was watching the first episode of Mr. Selfridge. And here's your lesson number 2. Nothing you do in life is insignificant, even watching a TV show. You would think the story ends here, but it continues. Fast forward 2 years later. I was going on my final buying trip of the year, having already gone to Morocco, Japan, and Argentina. Things were finally coming together and becoming more real. My vision for Mariposa Skies and what I wanted it to be was forming, and it all came to a head on this trip to Bali. Bali was my last stop, and really what brought this whole story full circle. All right, you know what to do. Time to grab your passports one last time because we are headed to the island of Bali. It was early afternoon in Ubud, Bali, and that meant rain. More like a torrential downpour. at least for an hour or so. When they say it's wet season, they really mean it. It's wet, it's rainy, and it pours down hard. You really can't do anything when this happens, so you have to find cover somewhere. So I headed back to my little villa before it got really bad. Once inside, I was hot and I was soaked to the bone. So I changed into my trusted and well-loved conga wrap from Brazil. I sat there listening to the rain and watching it come down on my little patio. I remember being very present in that moment. I looked down and noticed how very worn my conga had gotten. As I was looking at all the colors and really appreciating it for all the adventures we've had together, I noticed there was a word near one of the edges in white letters. I had noticed it before, but thought nothing of it. This time, however, it really felt important to understand what it said. It read, Magda Mitarchus. It was such an interesting combo of words that I wondered for a moment if that was the person who designed and made it. So, with that, I started my research. First, I went to Google and searched for the name. No website came up, but a Facebook profile did. I clicked on it, and lo and behold, it was a woman, an artist to be exact, from, drumroll please, Rio de Janeiro. Her primary work is painting beautiful, colorful pieces of art showcasing the beauty of Brazil, and some of those pieces she turns into congas and sells them. I couldn't believe it. Of course my conga is made by an artisan from Brazil. It all made complete sense now. Well, I couldn't stop there. I had to see if I could connect with the artisan. I commented on one of her pictures of the congas she had posted, and she replied. In a matter of moments, we exchanged numbers, and within 20 minutes, I was having a conversation in Portuguese while sitting on my patio in Bali. I just love technology. I told her about Mariposa Skies and what I do, and asked if she would like to partner with me. She was all in. We set up an order for 5 of her beautiful congas. She needed to check shipping costs, but that was it. I was finally connected to the person who designed and made my beloved conga. It was so surreal. And here's your final lesson, and it's a lesson I remind myself often of. Everything has a purpose and perfect timing. Let me explain. You see, if I didn't decide to quit my 3 jobs and go on a trip to South America for 4 months when I turned 30, I would have never bought that conga that helped plant the many seeds through conversations with strangers about that conga and where it came from. If I hadn't come back from that trip and worked at an upholstery shop where I learned about fabrics, leather, textiles, and workmanship, all of which contributed to my knowledge of how to find beautiful pieces of fashion during my travels, I wouldn't have had that conversation with my coworker about Mr. Selfridge that gave me the idea for Mariposa Skies. If I didn't have the moxie to start a business that took me around the world, including that trip to Bali during the wet season, I wouldn't have been sitting on that patio in my conga during a torrential downpour. And I wouldn't have gotten that nudge to investigate those words on my conga a little further to see if I could find out where that conga came from, if I hadn't been on 3 trips prior to that, where I really started to understand the importance of artisan-made fashion, and where I got to meet so many amazing independent artisans from Morocco, Japan, and Argentina. All of these events happened at just the right time, though I didn't see it or understand it until I was already through it, and could stand back and see how all the pieces came together to form the picture of Mariposa Skies. If you glean anything from this trip we took around the world today, I want you to remember this. Trust the timing of your life. I know that may be difficult sometimes, and honestly, easier said than done. Trust me, I feel you on that. I know you must want to be there already, wherever there is for you. Oftentimes you won't know how all the pieces fit together until you take a moment, stand back, and see that greater picture. Learn to trust yourself, and you will always be headed in the right direction. And most importantly, no matter how long it takes you, remember to enjoy the journey along the way. If you're so focused on the future, you will miss out on what lies before you right now, in the present. After all, yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift. That is why it's called the present. So this is how Mariposa Skies began. From a walk on a beach in Rio de Janeiro, to a seed that was planted with many conversations and a TV show, to having enough moxie to take 4 trips around the world, to create what it is today, a platform to help independent artisans from Morocco, Japan, Argentina, and Bali be seen and noticed, so you both can connect to each other through the fashion they create. If you want to check out Mariposa Skies and all the amazing handmade fashion pieces I've collected along my travels, visit my shop at mariposaskies.com. There you'll get to meet each independent artisan as well as see the fashion they create. Each piece is unique and made with a lot of love. You definitely won't find any of these pieces anywhere else. And if you're wondering what countries the conga has gone to, it has traveled the world over with me, starting in Brazil, trekking down to Argentina, taking a ferry to Uruguay, and hopping on a plane to Colombia. It's been to Spain, Portugal, England, and Morocco, heading its way over to Japan and Bali. Not to mention, it has been my comfort throughout my travels in the United States as well, having gone with me to New York, Chicago, Santa Fe, Bryce Canyon, and New Orleans. As you can see, wherever I go, it goes. Okay, before we conclude this episode today, I want to run something by you. I've been thinking about how this podcast can really be used as a guide of sorts. Many of you have told me it struck up a lot of conversations around traveling and telling your stories. So I want to try something and see if it sticks. I've noticed over the years that travelers love to tell their stories. Obviously, that's one reason why I started this podcast. But often it seems there's no outlet to tell those stories to someone. Part of the vision I have for this podcast is for this to be a safe place for you, my listeners, to be able to tell your amazing stories. That's why I want to start collecting your stories, so that this can be somewhere you feel like you can share your adventures with a community who really cares and wants to listen. So if you want your travel experiences to be shared with the world, please email me your story at anxiousadventurersclub@gmail.com. Put in the subject line, my travel experience, and then fill that email with your story. Once I've gathered up some of your stories, I want to either read one per episode or, depending on how many I get, do a whole episode with them. And if you feel so inclined, include any tips or lessons you've learned along the way. That way, this podcast can become a co-creation between you and me and really start to help those anxious adventurers out there become more brave and knowledgeable. I can't wait to see your story in my inbox. Okay, that's a wrap. Get it? Wrap? Conga? Okay, that was a bad joke, I know. But thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you learned a little, laughed a little, and my hope is it left you with some things to think about. Give me a follow on Instagram at Mariposa Skies. That's where I'll be sharing all the visuals of each podcast, including some great photos of this so talked about conga from Brazil. And one last little thing I want to leave you with before I say goodbye. Never, ever give up on your dreams. They are too important. You are too important. All right, that's it for today. Until next time, ciao, besos.